Let's see, I've been sitting in front of my computer for 10 hours because I'm working on this video edit, which I can't really talk about because it's not really official yet. But whenever I start editing in anything, you know how it is. Time just kind of disappears and all of a sudden it's 10 hours later and you look like a scarecrow.
I can appreciate that, but I assume that's a good sign that things are going reasonably well if you suddenly lose track of 10 hours.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's kind of a great place to be for any work. And it's sort of a luxury to have work that you can do that with, where you can just lose yourself in it and you can't believe how much time has gone by. I mean, sometimes it can be in frustration. You're trying to put something back together, but generally it's just a good thing. You're just concentrating.
I assume that in the cases of frustration, 10 hours feels like 10 hours.
Yeah, no, that is true. Probably 10 minutes feels like 10 hours.
I think that the sort of the buzz term right now is flow state. I don't know if that's something that you've heard before.
How do you use that? Like you say, like, I'm in a flow state, or...
Yeah.
How do you use that in a sentence?
I talk to a lot of cartoonists on the show, people who make comics. And as an artist, I'm sure you can appreciate how not only like time intensive, but also monotonous of a process that can be of just drawing all those panels. And they all talk about trying to achieve a flow state. Maybe mindfulness is a good way of putting it, or at least just really sort of like channeling the muse and really, really kind of feeling in the moment. And as you did today, losing all track of time. Right.
Yeah. Like I didn't even know it was 7:00 and Damon came in and was like, didn't you have an interview at 7? I was like, oh my God. Hence why I didn't even make an effort to not look like a scarecrow, because I didn't even know what time it was.
I know you're involved in all sorts of different mediums. Is that something that you find that has happened across different platforms?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm very flow statey in whatever I'm doing. I mean, it could be like, weeding in the garden, or working on a song, or cooking, or editing. I guess I'm good at concentrating on things. And what I'm not good at is probably relaxing. So it's like the opposite, like just doing something like watching bad TV. I'm like, I could be doing something useful.
Weeding is a very different activity than painting or making music or even editing.
I mean, it is in a way, but it also isn't, because like when you're weeding, right, you're kind of editing your garden and you're kind of looking at, even like, we use the example of the cartoonists, and I've never done anything like a graphic novel or a cartoon, but I was imagining you were kind of referring to maybe when they have to sort of reproduce similar panels in order to get emotion or something that's maybe more chore-like than just purely fun. But I mean, I think those are the moments when you're working on kind of subconsciously looking at what you're doing for the whole work. So yeah, you're weeding in the garden, but you're also looking at other things in the garden that are working or not working, or things that you want to move, or something you want to prune. And I don't know, it seems like those kind of more mundane, those road tasks, that's a moment when you can kind of free associate also, because your hands are occupied, but your mind is kind of free.
As I think you were alluding to earlier, I edit the podcast myself. And for me, editing the audio of this show, just editing like a long form interview, it's more of a mechanical process, at least as far as the way I tend to think of it, versus anything creative. It's really just a process of kind of tightening things up and pulling some of the meanderings and and silences out. It doesn't feel, to me at least, particularly creative. Where does editing fall for you between the sort of mechanical and the creative?
Oh, editing is so creative. I mean, you give two different editors the same raw material. People are going to choose differently. I mean, maybe for you feel like there's more of a standard in a podcast. There are going to be maybe stories that you might include that someone else wouldn't, or the timing of the way you cut things out. Maybe you're not just cutting out the and the stuttering or the vagueness. But I think, I mean, editing is such an art form, and also where, I mean, for film editing or video editing, it's where you place those cuts, and especially when you're syncing to music, that's really, it's like a choice, and that's, playing bass. It's not just obvious where you put. I mean, you think it's just like a 1, 2, 3, 4, but it's not quite so obvious where you decide to stress, and you can be a little before the beat, a little after the beat, dead on the beat, which I never am, according to Damon. He says I'm always after, but he likes that. And then I show him my video edits. He's like, "Yeah, you're still like editing. You're like after the beat." But I think editing, you're making choices. Those are aesthetic choices. So give yourself more credit.
I understand to the extent of my musical theory knowledge what it means to be behind the beat or after the beat in a piece of music. But what does that mean in the context of video editing? Well,
I mean, even in music, I'm not saying like really behind the beat, because if you're really behind the beat, then that would sound bad. I'm talking about like in video editing, say you have 24 frames per second. Right. And so where you make a cut, it could be on the 12th frame in that second, or the 18th frame in that second, and you actually really can feel a difference. And it's similarly in music. It's like where, you're playing a bass line, you're playing a keyboard part, and the guitar, the drums are one place. And it's like, you can just be like kind of a little behind, not really behind where it's annoying, but just kind of like a little back, or you're a little forward and you're kind of anticipating. So, I try and do my voice. I don't know if that really worked, but it's just kind of a feel. It's within like a second. So it's not like so much that it's annoying, hopefully. It's kind of a laid backness or sort of anticipating, kind of jumping on things. Or dead on, which is not me.
From the point of, I guess you would say in the musical context, you would say playing with feeling or playing based on feel. From that standpoint, is your approach to music and video, are they the same or similar?
Yeah, I think my approach to everything I do is really pretty intuitive. And I didn't go to music school. I never had, I still don't know how to really read music. I didn't do ear training, all of which I'm sure would serve me well. But just in terms of how I came to music and how I've always done it, I just done everything by ear, and, have been amazed by friends and fellow musicians who have all that training, and, how much they could know things that seem kind of magical when they can just identify something. I'm like, wow, how did you know that? But I've really, in everything I do, it's very intuitive and not based on science or rules. It's sort of, in graphic design, it's sort of a sense of proportion, shooting photographs or doing video and doing the camera work. It's really about trying to frame things so that they look beautiful or they're lit beautifully. But it's very, I don't know, it's just intuitive with me. It's not very schooled, I guess. I haven't had intense training except for just doing it and then seeing what works and what doesn't work for me.
You did, however, study visual art at Harvard, which, is a pretty good institution, I hear. Was that?
No, I feel like I've had a lot of visual training, but I didn't ever take a photography class. My father was a photographer, so I learned from watching him, but I didn't go to art school. I didn't take a film class, not even one. So, I guess, I had the benefit of a fantastic liberal arts education. In no way am I saying I'm autodidact. But in terms of my approach, I guess, and maybe it's just how I feel about it. Maybe it's how even people that have, gone to film school or have gone to Berkeley feel about their music. I don't know. I mean, I just always feel that about I've always felt that about our music, certainly, that there's so much that is just intuitive.
Again, regardless of medium, the majority of people I speak to who went to art school or studied music theory, there's always a sense of unlearning that has to occur there in order for you to set your own path.
Well, I guess that's just being a curious person, right? You don't ever feel like you've just got everything mastered. I mean, that's exciting when there's a new skill to learn. I mean, I didn't start working in video till about maybe 10 years ago. And it had never even really occurred to me to be making music videos or to be making films. And starting to learn how to do that was really exciting. You know, I like learning something new and the challenges. And I also love doing something that I never thought I would do before.
Yeah, obviously, you have been in bands, and I assume in those bands you have been the subject of music videos. What flicked the switch in you that you decided you wanted to be on the other side of the camera?
It was that I had made once a short tour diary when DV cameras first came out. So that was a long time ago. And it was really fun, and I really enjoyed the editing, but it felt very much like, well, that was a very specific thing to do. I was trying to shoot a tour diary, and I didn't have any, script that I wanted to do. I didn't have any ambitions to make fiction film or documentary. So I just assumed there was nothing really else that I was going to do with with that interest. So I kind of just didn't think about it for a while. And then I got a new DSLR, a new still camera, but it had a video capability in it. And we were on tour, and so it wasn't specifically just for video. And I just started taking sort of short videos of things that I saw that I liked, but with there was no project, no specific goal. And it was a very long tour, and I was sitting in the tour van, just kind of staring out the window. And I was thinking about it, and I literally was like, wow, like music videos are a really wonderful way where you can link imagery, like sort of poetic imagery, with music. And it's kind of time-based like music, but it doesn't have to be, a documentary. It doesn't have to be a fiction film, and it's short. And I just all of a sudden I was like, wow, what a wonderful short form. And it just seemed appealing to me. And it literally was like kind of like, just like, wow, that seems cool. And we were touring with this wonderful sax player named Bhob Rainey, BHOB RAINEY, and who does a lot of experimental work, a lot of extended technique. And I was like, hey, Bob, I was just thinking about like music videos and, how it's kind of interesting. Do you want a music video? And he was like, sure. So I made him one, and I was just like, we came home from tour, and I just took footage and I edited it to one of his pieces. And it was really just like falling in love. I was just like, this makes so much sense to me. It's photography, but it moves, and it has, I felt like the emotion and the way you could progress felt so familiar to me from music. It just was like, oh, the photography can come to life in that way. So I just started doing it, and I just started learning about it, and I just started basically asking friends and labels and people like, who needs a video, who wants to be my next victim. And that was a while ago. That was about 10 years ago, kind of before everyone was doing stuff like that on their phones. But it was, had gotten a lot easier to do just with a small camera. And you didn't need a crew or a big budget. And it's just been wonderful for me. And I love the editing process, and I love the shooting process. And I've loved the collaboration with other musicians, because it reminded me so much of how much I enjoy collaborating with musicians, like playing with other musicians. But I get to do it in a visual way. And so it's been really fun.
I've certainly experienced this in my own life, that there is just something that it was right in front of you the entire time. You've been a musician for a long time, and you've been a photographer for a long time.
I've never seen a music video before. It was like the dumbest aha moment. I was like, oh, music video is a really cool thing. But that has happened to you?
I'm struggling. I'll have to get back to you on that. I'm sort of like struggling to think of an example.
Okay. Your dumb aha moment.
I just think we go through life and everything is so compartmentalized, and we're always single-mindedly focused on something that
Yeah, I think that's true.
Epiphanies aren't always complicated, is how I would put it.
No, I think you're right. Or maybe you haven't, let yourself kind of go past the boundaries of how you define yourself. I mean, even for me, being in a band and being a musician at first, when we first started, was a very surprising thing, because I was in architecture school, which I eventually dropped out of to go on tour with Galaxie 500. But, it wasn't what I wasn't in Berkeley. At Berkeley, I wasn't what I had planned to do. I always loved music, and I always, sang and listened to so much music. But I, wasn't like I had gone to rock summer camp or anything.
What was the aha moment when it came to playing music?
I did it for a long time. And in Galaxie 500 even, I really thought, it's crazy now to think in retrospect, but I thought like, music is too fun and too...
Is that why you studied architecture? Because it felt like a real job?
Yeah, exactly. And music was like hanging out with your friends and, not being schooled in it and making stuff up that you liked, that you wanted to hear. But it wasn't, I was trying to also paint at the time, and painting was like hitting my head against the wall. I would go to the studio and it was so hard to, and it's what I thought I wanted to do. But it was interesting because, literally it was like painting was a blank canvas. And for me, it didn't have the sort of parameters that graphic design or music or even like filmmaking now, where there's some kind of structure of what you're trying to make imposes on you. I think other people could do that with painting, but for me, I just was like, I have no idea. I want to paint something. But because that was so hard, I felt like, oh, that was real art. So it took a long time. And I felt that way about photography for a long time, because my father was such a serious photographer. He was a landscape photographer and worked in black and white and in very elaborate darkroom processes, and used big, heavy, old-fashioned cameras. And everything was an incredible amount of work and so much technical expertise. And I thought, well, that's photography. And so when I was taking pictures with my camera, and they were color, it was the black and white. It was like, well, that's not real photography. This is just too fun and easy. And it took me a while to kind of accept, things that are fun, I can take seriously. So, that was just me and I have kind of very sort of strict and kind of strange upbringing. That's sort of what I was programmed to think.
Equate taking something seriously with it becoming a job?
No, I don't. Well, I don't know. I feel like whenever I do something, I take it seriously and I try and really do it as well as possible, whether or not I'm being paid for it. I feel like that's, in my personal work ethic. It doesn't matter. It sort of gets me in trouble sometimes when I do freelance work. It's like, it doesn't matter how much or how little I'm being paid for something. I work really hard on it and I take it really seriously. So that's why I also kind of have to be careful when I do take on freelance work, because I can spend a lot of hours and a lot of time and not be paid for them. And, sometimes that's fine. And it's completely worthy and I want to do it. But yeah, I really take everything very seriously. So I don't think some people don't treat their jobs that way. I sort of treat everything that way.
Because we're talking about a point in your life when you were going to school, you were obviously young, you were trying to figure out, you're trying a bunch of things as most of us do, trying to figure out which one's stuck.
Right.
And part of that is also figuring out like which one of these things you could potentially make a career out of. Certainly this is the case with a lot of people I talk to, and it's the case with me as well. When your hobbies become a job, oftentimes that takes some of that initial spark that you felt in it out of the equation.
I mean, I think if you do anything with enough depth, there's always going to be parts of it that are less fun than others, right? Yeah, and then I guess the thing is like when something is a job, it's just you have good clients or bad clients, and maybe a hobby you're just doing it for yourself. I don't know. I just did the things that I enjoyed and was kind of very much in the moment about it. And so that wasn't really it wasn't really good planning. I mean, leaving architecture school was not good planning for steady employment. Joining a band certainly was not. That wasn't a good plan for steady employment. But I've just always, muddled through and managed.
Where does architecture school fit into all of this?
Both my parents had been architects, and they both left architecture, but they insisted that I had to go to architecture school, and that I could be an artist, but, you have to be an architect. It's funny because I have friends whose, families felt that way about like law school.
You hear that about law school.
Yeah, exactly.
You hear that about becoming a doctor.
Whatever you want to do. Yeah. But go to law school. Well, I don't know, for whatever reason, my family, because neither of my parents had stayed in architecture, but I don't know, just lack of imagination. They thought it was good training. I think it was good training for if I want to be an architect.
I understand it from the perspective that it's a compromise of sorts in that it is creative, and although it is obviously like more math and geometry based, it does use some similar skill set or like a similar.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's it's facial and you're making things. I mean, I love a lot of architecture and architects. I mean, I don't think it's not a creative profession. It just, for me, what? It was just that I felt the scale of it was wrong. That it was about making things, to be an architect, making things that you had to have a lot of people working on it, and it was all about looking at making these huge things and not with your own hands. And I just really wanted to work more deliberately with things I could actually manipulate. Like I always thought I would rather be the bricklayer, or I would rather be making something where I could stand back and look at it and say, oh, it needs to be a little bigger here, like adjust it. I had this fantasy that if I became an architect, I would like draw everything out and, make a model, and pre-computer architecture school. And then something would go up and I would look at it and be like, oh my God, that's totally wrong. And the proportions all wrong. And how could I have known? Because of this little tiny model and this idea in my head. And it wasn't something I could adjust with my hands. And that's just really how I wanted to make things. And so I just felt like that was wrong for me, like the scale of what you were making.
It's also the case of you do your part of the process, you do the layouts, and then I assume it changes hands. There's thousands of other people.
You really have to be either it's like being in an army, and either you're a soldier and you're figuring out the bathrooms or the emergency exits or the window details, or you're the general and you're sort of, or somewhere in between, and you have a larger view. But it is not about just making something with your hands by yourself. And that huge amount of collaboration it just didn't interest me. I often think about, the films and the videos that I make, which are, I pretty much do everything. I mean, sometimes I can afford and be able to have people do lighting or assist me or do a second camera. But more often than not, I'm just there and I'm shooting it myself, and I'm doing the lighting myself, and I'm directing it or talking to, musicians about the concepts, and then I'm editing it, and then I'm, and I do everything myself. And, it's like the opposite of a big production. And, I see how things with big budgets and a lot of people doing it, they can look really fantastic. But I've just landed in doing these things myself on a very small scale. And I don't even know if I would really want to have a giant crew and hundreds of people running around, or tens of people. I see the fantastic things that people can make. But I think it kind of goes back to my impulse in architecture school, which is kind of wanting to just craft something myself.
One of the things I was going to ask with regard to painting, you were talking about sort of the absence of parameters, and I completely understand why that makes it difficult to find a starting point. But also, painting is very much a solitary process, really, for the vast majority of people, to a fault. But these art forms that you've largely gravitated towards, although, with video editing, there are large parts that are just you. It is collaborative, as you said earlier. It's collaborative with the musician, and obviously making music, particularly in a band or a duo, is an extremely collaborative process. And that kind of has its own built-in set of parameters.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the collaboration is always wonderful and something that I really, really do love. And the parameters that you get having to work with other musicians, and you get to be surprised by the wonderful things that, people play on your record, or the things that they want out of their video, or the things that they do when you're filming them, which is different than just, doing whatever I want, do the blank canvas and just what I want. I mean, that's one reason I love graphic design is you have the parameters of, it has to serve this purpose. It's a book cover, or it's text, and it has to be legible pretty much, but how can you take those parameters and how can you add some life in them? How can you play with them? Yeah, but the collaboration, I mean, that was what was so joyful about finding video and film, that it was an extension of the collaboration that I've always enjoyed about playing music. I was
thinking, as I was reading up about the new record, I was thinking about collaboration from the standpoint of, so obviously when I talked to Damon, we did it in person in a hotel in Boston. Now I'm talking to you over this remote program. And that's just because that's how things are in 2020 and 2021. And it seems to some degree like that is the direction that maybe things have been heading in for music, and will probably continue to head in as far as doing kind of remote collaboration on music. But reading up on this, it sounds like you had been waiting to get into the same room as your guitar player for a really long time in order to sit down and make music.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, working with Kurohara has been an amazing long-term collaboration really over the last 20 years. And it has always been something that recording together has always been something we have done in the same room. And I know so many people have made records in this past year, and they've been kind of passing. I mean, people have been doing it from way before that. But we really have been working, and this, again, it'd be more Damon's area of expertise because he does all the engineering for our records. We tend to try and record with people in the room and not just sending tracks out to people and then having them send us something back, which we've done with friends and it's totally fun. But we wanted to wait till we could be with Kuri. And that's why it was so fantastic that in 2019, before the pandemic happened, we were able to go to Japan and record with him because he had been unable to work or travel for a few years because of family situation and personal circumstances. And so we wanted to wait till it was really possible for him.
Was that this record, that collaboration?
We hadn't toured with him for a long time. And we really were waiting for it to be possible. And we had recorded a record in between while he was still unavailable, which was a soundtrack to a short film that I did, but he wasn't on it. And we really wanted this new record to have him on it. And so it was the most joyful thing to be able to go and record in Tokyo with him, be together and play shows and have him put down these tracks. And that was all in the fall of 2019. And we literally, it was like November, and we, came home and we're about to finish the record by putting down the vocals and the final overdubs. And that's when the pandemic hit. And it was sort of, our plan to have the record out in the fall and then tour in the fall, just obviously like everything else in the world became postponed. And so it also became hard for us to finish the record because although we had the melodies when we went over to Japan, we hadn't written the lyrics yet. And it was surprising how the pandemic hitting just made it's all of a sudden writing lyrics seemed impossible, because especially if you're drawing, as we tend to do, on experience and sort of your emotional state, or sort of your thoughts that you've had since the last record, all of a sudden it was like, oh my God, what is there possibly to say right at this moment? You can't ignore the fact that there's a pandemic, and you don't want to just write only songs about being in a pandemic. And so it really took a little while to kind of figure out our bearings in terms of writing lyrics for this record and how we wanted to approach it. Which I think, we did in the end. Most of the lyrics were written during the pandemic. There was a song or two that we had the lyrics from before, but it just became clear after wanting to reach out to a friend that was going through a really difficult time, and just a lyric came in mind that was sort of something I wanted to share with them. And then that act kind of opened everything up and made it feel like, it was possible to write something because you could still just want to be communicating, and you didn't have to be commenting one way or the other on what was going on, but just sort of having some human communication.
What was the lyric that opened everything up for you?
It's the lyric of the song. It's called Season Without Time, and it was inspired by two friends who really faced a lot very bravely. And I was so moved by how they dealt with everything that I wrote this. And it was taken, the words were taken from a painter that I like a lot named Charles Birchfield. He was an American painter from like the 30s and not really, I guess like 40s and 50s. He kept journals, and his journals are fantastic. And I had been just stealing phrases from his journals, and it just all came together. So even the title, Season Without Time, is taken from his journals.
Is that pretty standard for you?
Stealing?
Putting together, stealing well. I mean, it sounds like you had an entire record full of melodies.
Yeah.
In order to have that collaboration. Is that the way you two work generally? We've
always, in all of our bands, written the music first, and the melodies and lyrics come after the songs. But with Kurihara, he really, really likes to know what the melodies are going to be, because when he's working on his electric guitar parts, he's really listening to the melodies, and he doesn't want to step on them or get in the way of them. And he also wants to sort of be inspired from them. I mean, that said, he also loves it when we can tell him the lyrics, but we can't always do that. But he does ask us what the feeling of the song is about. So, but anyway, so I mean, just in terms of having a whole song without any lyrics. Yes, that happens to us, but we did have the melodies because we went to Japan with the songs and with the melodies so that we could show Kurihara where we were going to be singing and what we were going to be singing. But since we didn't have the actual lyrics, he asked us what sort of was our feeling about each song. So it was very amusing because I just started in the studio kind of giving him these images to sort of help him get the feeling. And they got very elaborate because he would seem very inspired by it. So it gave me license to free associate. But we actually wrote down what I told Corey in the studio. And then when we came back to work on the lyrics, we actually went back to the associations we had, like early morning before the sun comes up and there's, a low mist and you hear the rustling of the leaves, a lot of very natural imagery or a memory that we had. And then we actually drew on that when we wrote the lyrics.
You kind of got to be a painter in a sense.
Maybe I'll finally get to be a painter.
Can you have a feeling without the lyrics? Instrumentals evoke feelings in people, but how do you settle on something less abstract than that? Something tied to whether it's a specific place or a time or an event. How do you settle on that without having any lyrics written down?
In general, if I'm singing a song, I've written the lyrics for it. And if Damon is singing a song, he's written the lyrics for it. And that's pretty much settled, that arrangement. We kind of settled on that maybe after our second or third Damon and Naomi record, where originally he was really writing most of the lyrics. And then when I started singing more, I kind of rebelled because I would be like, I don't want to sing that. And then you'd be able to write your own lyrics. So in general, we've each written our own. So I think his process is a little different from mine. I will just collect phrases that I think of or imagery that I think of, or do something like gather them from the Birchfield journals. But that was a very specific one that was, once I started doing that, I kind of wanted to make the whole lyric out of that. And I was writing them down for the songs anyway. So then when I went to Japan, I already had some imagery, but then I just elaborated on when I saw Corey was very responsive. And then I think for Damon's songs, I think I just made up because he hadn't done any work on his lyrics yet. I think I just made stuff up, but we did write it down. So then, but I sort of was like, oh, this is a love song, or this is, there's some very simple things that you just sort of have a feeling about, like, oh, this sounds like it should be a certain type of song. I don't know. I think you could do that with an instrumental, right? Like you would hear that and you would sort of hear something in it, or it reminds you of something. I'm
always fascinated by how instrumental, whether it's jazz musicians or like post-rock musicians, choose the titles. Oftentimes it's completely arbitrary, but I assume sometimes it does evoke something more specific. Yeah, sometimes. And I think sometimes that's why it's hard to remember the titles when it's just instrumental music. I live in Queens and I've been stuck in my one-bedroom apartment for the pandemic. And there was a while when I I got sick for a while and wasn't able to leave my apartment. When we're all going through something like this, and when we do kind of lose connections with other people and our ability to, sort of go out and experience the world in ways that we have previously, we find solace in unexpected places. I found a portal online where you can listen to people's ham radio transmissions. And I got kind of obsessed with that for a while. It was just sort of interesting to not eavesdrop exactly because, they knew it was public, but just to kind of flip around the dial and hear random people that you would never hear again talking about, the weather in a small town in Georgia. And it's not exactly the same, but it sounds like the shipping forecast provided a similar kind of solace for the two of you. Absolutely. Yes. And listening to the BBC shipping forecast, which I don't know if most people in the US don't know what it is, but it happens, I
think it happens 3 times a day, but we were listening to the one that happens at 1 a.m. GMT, but it happened around 7:45 here in Boston, and we could listen on the BBC radio app. And it's about 10 minutes long, and they describe the weather at sea in all the areas around the British Isles. So it's very strange and mysterious if you don't know what's going on, because they're just listing these names and listing these numbers. It also was very, very beautiful in some ways, and it has a great song that it opens with called Sailing By, which is sort of a 60s orchestral piece that in a way is really sappy and in a way is totally entrancing. And we started listening to that. Yes. And for us, the first place that we really toured a lot was in England, in Great Britain. And it's somehow, we have a very long connection to Great Britain for our music. We always played so much over there, and we have had wonderful audience over there for years. And I don't know, it was where our first records came out. It was where our first record label was, Rough Trade. Somehow hearing the shipping forecast and hearing them just mention these names of all these places in Great Britain, it felt very tied to the touring that we couldn't do, and specifically that place. So I think for us, it was very specifically because it was from Great Britain, and because it was sort of traveling through it every night, and hearing, the different British accents. The different readers all have fantastic different versions of British accents, Scottish accents, Welsh accents. It was sort of like a small way to travel, to be on tour every night. So, of course, we had to write a song dedicated to Sailing By, the theme song to the shipping forecast.